Siena, 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 Siena,
Test. Kset. Test. 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 test, test, test.
Hello and welcome, everyone. We still have the problem that we hear ourselves. No, we are fine now. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Ilva Tara. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. I host Balkans Debrief, which is an online interview series for Atlantic Councils covering the most pressing issues on the Western Balkans. And to be honest, I was delighted when I received the invitation to moderate the first forum of this very important event today. You may not believe me, but the truth is that I thought to be a little bit different and with a fresh perspective. So for my opening remarks, I thought to rely on the artificial intelligence. Exactly what the organizer did with the avatar in the opening forum. And I'll read, and you may think it's coordinated, it's not. But let's say that the great minds think alike. I asked the question of the conference, unlocking progress, the European future of the Western Balkans, and this is the sentence that I got from chatbot craze, artificial intelligence. The Balkans' European destiny can be only unlocked by a united effort to bolster the rule of law, combat corruption, mend open bilateral wounds, deepen regional cooperation, and empower civil society and youth. Basically, even the robot knows that some universal values have to be there. There is no compromise in implementing and making them part of the Western Balkans reality. So without much talking, because I trust this debate will be productive and I hope thought-provoking, because I know the guests and they're excellent. But before we start with the conversation and with our panel, I would like to invite for his opening remarks His Excellency, Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of Albania, my dear friend, Igliasani.
Many thanks, Ms. Tara, many thanks, dear Ilva, for getting your phone on these particular days. Using artificial intelligence and intelligence is not easy. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address this forum. It is true that governments are, of course, responsible for implementing EU-related reforms on rule of law and democratic transformation and for advancing the agenda of economic development. But we believe that the role and engagement of civil society for economic growth, institutional reforms, and convergence of the region with the European Union is crucially essential. And I can give you an example. The aim of infrastructure investment, one of the main topics of the Berlin process, since we are in this particular week of the whole Berlin engagement, is to connect people and economies to make a tangible contribution to the growth and the social cohesion in the region and with the EU, to create common living spaces, regional linkages, and rapprochement between communities and people. And that is why civil society engagement is crucial. I'd like to stress how important it is at the current juncture to unlock progress on our European future. the EU integration of the Western Balkans has gained a new momentum. I think it is the moment to translate it into action. The only effective response to our common challenges is to strengthen our strategic cooperation in security matters, in foreign policy, in the areas of the rule of law and economic development. The geopolitical situation makes it imperative that we, as strategic partners, take our cooperation to the next level. And in our view, this means, first and foremost, a credible accession process, a process that is credible on both sides. Albania is doing its utmost to meet all the requirements that would pave the way for an accelerated EU integration perspective, despite the challenge of addressing the economic and social consequences of the triple shock of the 2019 earthquake, the pandemic of 2020, and of course the consequences of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Albania is committed to the core values of the European Union, and these are things that probably you have heard it so many times, but you'll continue to hear it because it's not only an exercise for us, but it's an exercise for our minds and our future. And these core values include respect for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And our commitment to these values is firm, not only in the domestic context, but also in the international and regional arena. In addition to pushing ahead with domestic reforms, we have strengthened our role as a reliable and constructive partner in the region, and we have given a crucial and proactive contribution to the security of the Western Balkans. We have tried to work hard to further engage and deepen our good neighborly relations while adopting a proactive approach to the regional cooperation. And by hosting this year's summit of the Berlin process, we will strengthen our contribution to regional cooperation. We need to see also on the EU side a tangible commitment to the credibility of our EU accession perspective. That's why we look forward to the opening of the negotiations on the fundamentals cluster in the second intergovernmental conference by the end of this year. This would send an important signal of the credibility of the EU perspective for the region. And secondly, in parallel with the process of accession negotiations and not replacing it, building resilience and supporting economic convergence of the countries of the region with the EU should define the new EU agenda of prioritizing our region and engaging with it. We aim to make this the main topic of the summit of the Berlin process on Monday. But we need to address in earnest the question how we get ready for EU accession. The finalization of the common regional market is a stepping stone to the internal market of the EU and towards completion of the EU accession process. The region has been given significant access to the EU single market through the stabilization and association agreements. Through CEFTA, we have made progress on regional trade integration, and these agreements were instrumental to enable a first level of economic alignment and a free trade area as a first step towards EU membership. Further economic alignment of the Western Balkans with the EU single market through further phasing in and accelerated integration to individual EU programs and policies as defined in the EU accession negotiations methodology, further implementation of the economic and investment plan of the European Commission for the Western Balkans, focusing on trade in goods, electronic commerce, and integration in sustainable value chains, are now of major essence. And we welcome the announcement of the new growth plan for the region, and we will try to unlock the potential of many initiatives. We have to face, at the same time, very seriously the reality of a slow economic convergence of our region with the European Union. In order to address this problem, market integration should be supported by ambitious infrastructure investment programs. The economic and investment plan is a good tool, but very much a project-based tool. It is built mostly on projects coming from the region, but we need to see the long-term strategic vision of the cohesion policy. So I think we need a brand new approach, and we also need an invigorated financial support. The present approach, with IPA limited budgetary allocations first and cohesion funds after reaching membership, cannot bring about the results we all aim at in terms of convergence. We're all well aware that cohesion policy also requires good governance, proper planning, skills that we, the Western Balkan countries, have to strengthen in order to make use of these resources. We're fully committed to progress in this respect by making the best use of the current instruments at our disposal and of the future growth plan for the Western Balkans. And most importantly, by delivering on rule of law reforms, as I stressed from the outset. I would like to thank you, the representatives of civil society, for your efforts in supporting the EU integration process. I believe that our close cooperation and your contribution and monitoring will help us meet our common objective of bringing Albania closer to EU membership. This is not the government's path. This is our path, be that on the government, be that on the civil society, be that as simple voters, wherever our people are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Hassani. I'm going to just mention two takeaways from your keynote speech. Credible process, which I'm sure I'm going to discuss with my panelists in a few minutes, and we need a brand new approach on economic convergence. Before we start, let me introduce the panelists. I would like to welcome Michael Reifunštel, Director for the Western Balkans at the Federal Foreign Office, to join the panel. I would like to welcome Ms. Odeta Western Balkans and EU Affairs. Thank you, Odeta. Melinda Bregu, Secretary General of RCC, Regional Cooperation Council. I would like to welcome Milka Tadic-Mijovic, President of the Center for Investigative Journalism of Montenegro. Welcome, Milka. And we have two more guests that will join our conversation online. From Brussels is Michela Matuela, Acting Director of the Western Balkans, Director General of Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations. Thank you, Michela, for joining us. And we have another guest online from Pristina, Donika Emini, Executive Director, Civicos. Welcome, Donika. I will start with the Secretary General of RCC, Melinda Bregu. She will respond my first question because she has another pressing engagement. She will leave our conversation a little bit earlier. But I want to start with very important action plans that RCC follows, which is the Common Regional Market. And I believe this is a joint exercise, the Common Regional Market, to prepare the region for the European market. Ms. Bregu, do you believe that the Common Regional Market is a viable strategy for promoting economic growth through the spillover effect? Or is it merely a way to delay a decision on EU enlargement? Now, before you give me the answer, I want to continue, because I know that you have been in the auditoriums with your students in your early years of the career. Can you, in your previous life, can you give us from 1 to 10, how do you assess the current level of regional cooperation and regional economic cooperation?
Can you ask ChatGPT on that? So I'm sure AI knows things better than we do today. And maybe my answers are going to be less mind-blowing. But let me start from the last one. I'm not going like to put a vote on the regional cooperation. But I would say, like we used to say to the students, that if you work hard, then you are going to have better results. So that, I think, goes, it's like the same with the regional cooperation. If the countries of the region and all of us working together trying to give them a hand, because at the very end it's not an RCC job, but it's the responsibility of the leaders of this region. If they have decided that they need really to work hard to deepen the economic integration of this region, which is not more today than 17.hardly 6 million people, then they are going to give a chance to, let's say, to a better future and to a more serious cooperation. And if I'm going back to the first and second question of yours, hopefully I will recall those perfectly. We all know like how the Balkans looks. It's that tapestry full of colors where conflicts are present, but as well as friendship is present. Good neighborhood relations are present as well, although we usually speak and we mark the most problematic ones. But the story of the common regional market, which was born 3 years ago, but before that was regional economic area, but still the common regional market born 3 years ago couldn't be like an accomplished task. If you think that even for the EU member states, the single market started 30 years ago, they still consider it an unfinished business or a work in progress. The common regional market is going to take a lot of time before becoming the most viable instrument of deepening the economic integration of the region. But still, I do think that that is a good instrument. It is a good instrument not only because it works in enhancing the cooperation among the countries, it is something that we really need seriously. The GDP of this region is hardly 140 billion euros, which is less than 1% of the EU GDP. And the GDP per capita of our countries is more than 36% less than the average of the EU. So just make a calculation. When Bulgaria joined EU, that time their GDP per capita was 40% average of the EU GDP per capita, and it was not enough. When Croatia joined the EU, the GDP per capita was 60% of the EU average of GDP per capita, and that was not enough. Could you imagine how much we will need to join the single market? So all this, considering the unemployment rate, considering that people are leaving our countries day by day, they are like voting on their feet somehow. This will definitely ask for more cooperation and a better development, that it is based and it is mostly in our hands. It is as well part of all that help that we do consider and we are always looking forward from the EU. But you know, the financial, let's say, support is never enough, and it's not enough for the pressing issues that the Western Balkans is facing. So I would consider it a good instrument. But on the other hand, it is an instrument that will be, if taken more seriously, it can produce and give some better and tangible results. Did I forget anything?
Not so far, no. I just didn't get it right. Is it a spillover effect, or it's merely a way to say, you know what, we're not ready for enlargement yet? Continue to your homework.
No, I wouldn't say it's like a spillover effect. We know that there is a spillover effect because of the realities we live into. But it's not that the only effect of the common regional market is the spillover effect. So just let me, even if that I have over-mentioned it all these times, but I still have to to say it again. Only 2 exercises or 2 showcase stories from the common regional market or the regional cooperation. One is part of the digital agenda, the reduction of roaming charges. It started with a lot of efforts to lift the barriers and speak freely without any additional costs in the Western Balkans. At that time when this promise was made and that declaration was signed in Belgrade during the digital summit, we were promised that the day that you will speak freely, roam like at home among each other, then that will be the first day that you'll start negotiations to reduce the roaming charges with the EU. So once we managed to speak freely among ourselves, we started to negotiate with the EU to speak freely with them. And the reduction of the roaming charges that entered into force EU Western Balkans on this 1st of October, and I'm still waiting for all the reports from the civil society and all their criticism, but even support, to see how this story will really affect the people's life. From that day, we can say that this is like a good exercise that convinces people that whenever there is a good result at home among ourselves, that good result can have a spillover effect in the EU policies or to the EU single market, if you are asking on the positive effect of the spillover. The second one is the green lanes, for example. The green lanes started as out of the necessity during COVID time in the Western Balkans. But once we managed to keep our borders open during COVID, and that was really a hard thing, it was not that easy. So a lot of friends here in this room, and I see a lot of people here who've been that time in contact with us. They knew how hard and difficult it was to keep a border open, especially in between the countries that have a conflict among them. But we managed so, and once that worked out, then we extended, and it's not RCC, it's TCT working mostly on that transport community, then we extended it to keep the borders open between EU and Western Balkans. So the same thing is going to work with all the agendas in case we'll be able to produce some more results as part of our regional cooperation. On the enlargement is a very long story, and I think it's going to take the time of all this panel, so most probably Michela is going to tell you more about that. But I'm sure that the further steps of enlargement are going to pass through the gradual integration of our countries into the EU single market.
Since you have become a politician, in your other previous life, you didn't give me an exact note from 1 to 10, but I think it's a passing note, yeah? So you're free to go if you want.
Yeah, in the Western countries it's like, yeah, pass or fail, so maybe it's
somewhere close there. Thank you very much, Ms. Bregu. I want to ask Michael Reifenstiel now about Germany's perspective as the driver of this Berlin process. How can the EU's new financial instruments be used to promote economic prosperity, democratic transformation, and the perspective of the EU membership for the Western Balkans? And how can the Berlin process contribute to this? Thank you.
Many thanks. First remark is really the congratulations from the federal government to Albania. You're the first country that now, since the process was started in 2014, who really took the ownership of the process in the region. And this was for us a really important signal, because all the other meetings, also the summits and so on, it was always around the region. And I think that this is the first issue that is really important to us, that for the Berlin process, also the 6 Western Balkan countries, that they're really taking ownership. And so congratulations, we know that this is a quite challenging process, interior, foreign ministers meeting, parliamentary meetings, civil society, green agenda and so on, and then the summit finally on the 16th. So we know this is challenging, but I think this was a really important signal from Albania that they were willing to take it up. So on the Berlin process, what Odella said, affecting people's life, I really did like this sentence, because the Berlin process has a couple of ideas. One is, as you know, is strengthening regional, intra-regional cooperation. The second one is getting the Western Balkan countries closer to the European Union. And the third one is improving neighborhood relations between the countries. And what we really look also very specifically into the issue is how, with the Berlin process, actually we can make a change for people's life here. Because I think sometimes it's always the challenge, all this kind of politics, it seems very, very abstract, and people are asking, on our way towards the European Union, what is really getting better in our day-to-day life? And there, I think you mentioned a couple of issues where we achieve progress. For example, the traveling without visa, with ID cards, the free mobility agreements on recognition of job descriptions and so on. So these are issues where really people, I think, can see a progress. You mentioned also the roaming, the reduction of the roaming. And then in the end, what you mentioned should be really, it should be free. So this is one strand of work where we know it's sometimes tiresome, it's sometimes frustrating, but if you would ask me whether the glass is half full or half empty, this is always a question of definition. But I think in these 9 years where we now have the Berlin process, at least we could achieve, also with the common regional market, with CEFTA, we could reach a couple of things that really also help getting the Western Balkan countries closer to the European Union. Your question, or let me add one element that is really important. We have here actually a meeting of civil society, and it was mentioned by you, Minister. I think if we are speaking of a process like getting towards the European Union, this is not only the task of politicians, but it really needs a consolidated effort of politics, of parliamentarians, of the executives. It needs also the support of civil society, also youth. This is why we do have right to the youth forum, because I really think it must be together with business, especially the last three elements. They really have also to push governments, they have to be a driver, they have to demand really to get process. So I think in this regard, especially the Civil Society Forum, what I think we do have now for a couple of years, is it difficult to understand better? Yeah. So it's really important that we also do have these elements like the Civil Society Forum. On your issue of the enlargement, I give the first shot to Michela, because she's much closer to this. And then I'm happy to comment on it.
Thank you. Before we go to Michela, Ms. Barbalushi, are new and more flexible financial instruments needed for the Western Balkans from the EU?
Well, first of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me here today. I'm really impressed by the turnout, and I'm really happy to see so many friendly faces. And I think this is a demonstration of what is closest to the idea of a regional public sphere ever. So I'm very glad that we have this forum organically integrated in the activities, in the agenda of Berlin Process chairmanship, of the Albanian chairmanship, and indeed of Berlin Process more broadly. But I think we have had some very good recommendations, very good reports already by civil society organizations, which we will be integrating in the discussions of the leaders, and I think that's a benefit of such a forum. Well, let me start where actually General Secretary of RCC ended it, that the single market is not a complete project yet, is not finished, so we cannot really claim that common regional market finishes or is complete. I would go a step further. I would say this is something which I think in this room we all agree, that the project of EU integration is not over yet, and is not over and is not finished. The European project is not finished without the Western Balkans. And I'm not saying something new here. It's something we have said time and again since Thessaloniki summit. But in this particular moment, particularly in the heels of the war in Ukraine, this has become, there is a new awareness that in fact, indeed, the Western Balkans must be brought closer to the European Union. And hence, in that context, we have seen some new ideas. We have seen the announcement of the growth plan by the President of the European Commission with the 4 pillars, including what you referred to in your question as enhanced financial instruments for the Western Balkans, but wedded to other 3 elements which are as important: deepening regional cooperation, deepening reform or accelerating reform or implementation of reforms which are part of EU accession path, and also a more or closer political cooperation and relationship with the Western Balkans, which would mean participation of the Western Balkans in or interaction with European and EU fora. And these all 4 elements should be taken as a whole. We as a region, I can speak from a national perspective, but also from a regional perspective, having worked on the region since 2014, we take them all as one package. Now, you mentioned specifically the financial instruments, and indeed it has been one of the 3 pillars of Berlin Process since its very launch in 2014, that this process would help the region be more integrated in the EU, be more integrated also in policy areas and sectoral areas of the single market, namely the improvement of economic convergence. Now, what we have seen 9 years after the beginning of the process is that, in fact, this particular pillar has been underdeveloped for a variety of reasons. EU financial instruments being, of course, one of them. And what we have seen, particularly with the connectivity package, with connectivity map or the plan, if the term is correct, since 2016, is that, in fact, this is one of the priorities for the region. It has a strategic importance for the EU as well. but the funding is very limited, doesn't reflect the need of this region. So if we are thinking even in more concrete physical terms, how to bring the region closer, even though geographically it is at the heart of the EU, but how to connect it better in terms of transport, in terms of digitalization, in terms of energy, which has become even a more vital question after the beginning of the war in Ukraine. These questions, these policy areas require more funding. And that has triggered, I think, a very fruitful and very important debated discussion, particularly in this part of the room, which is among civil society and the experts community. How to enhance EPA funding, but also how to tailor the funding for the EU after cohesion funds. And that's a debate.
Sorry to interrupt. In order to have those positive impacts and positive cases that we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. If you can conclude, and then I'll go to Michela.
In order, we need more financial funding, that's for sure.
In order to go there.
That's for sure, but also to, what we say, to bridge this gap, development of socio-economic gap between the EU and the Western Balkans. Some numbers were already quoted here, but what we have heard in the past year, particularly with the war in Ukraine, the extension of the status of candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova, and this new debate also in the context of the growth plan, what we hear from the part of the EU is, but enlargement would cost a lot. And this is something I would actually like to start debunking, and I think this part of the room has made a very important contribution in debunking this myth. Because if we look at research, if we look at numbers and expertise, if all countries were to become members now, all countries of the Western Balkans, not of Eastern Partnership, the 6 would be members now, the rise or the burden on the national, the GNP of member states would not vary more from 0.014 to 0.027%. That's a research expertise that comes from the expertise community. So the economic argument of it, I don't think it's the one that we should be involved in as a region. The most, I think, important debate here is how to align with the acquis, how to complete our reforms in those strategic areas of the single market, in those policy areas where phasing in is very important to make what you just said, that leap, or to really see difference in the region. And some of the areas were already mentioned here, like infrastructure, energy, digitalization, innovation, research. And one area which I think we are thinking more and more increasingly these days, for obvious reasons, is security. In this country, when we were first to sign the Frontex agreements with the EU, because I'm thinking of security in a broader sense, incorporating all levels and dimensions of it, there was a lot of debate. Why do we need a bilateral agreement with the EU on Frontex? And then all other countries in the Balkans now have agreements of Frontex agreement with the EU, and at the Ministerial of Interior, we signed the second phase, or the renewed agreements. This logic, bilaterally, or all of us, all 6 as a region, that can sign agreements, can become part of mechanisms and institution forums and policy instruments in the security area is vital, is not something to be debated at this point. So I think this is very important. The second, I think, is a time frame. Some dates were announced some weeks ago by the President of EU Council. From our end, or from our national perspective, we have always seen the process of EU accession as a transformative process. It is important to sit at the table. It's important to start this socialization process with EU institutions and this process of adopting the EU acquis. But at the same time, it's important for us as a region to have a time frame. When we speak about common regional market, or when we speak about phasing in, we need to have plans jointly prepared, jointly devised as a region, not individually. And I think this moment requires that.
Thank you, Odeta. I want to remain and discuss the financial instruments. As we are saying, they are crucial instruments. I know that EU Commission President von der Leyen is coming tomorrow to Tirana, and I hope we will hear more about this growth plan for the Western Balkans, more details and funds available to be given to the Western Balkans. But I want to ask Michela Matuela on exactly this need that the EU aid that can come from the European country assistance program for the Western Balkans to create the tangible positive effects that we are discussing in this panel today. We know we have data now, like Croatia's GDP had a 75% increase once became an EU member. Michela, what you can share with us? There was someone trying to interrupt
I cannot
us.
hear you any longer.
I think you're fine now. We hear you perfectly. We can continue. There was a little interference, but now we're fine. Can you hear? Okay, perfectly. You can continue. Apologies.
Is there again a problem? Sorry.
One who doesn't have our permission. There is another avatar among us. We have a technical problem. Can we make sure that voice is not heard? Okay, Michela.
from creating a single economic space in the region. Let's face it, the economies of the individual Western Balkan partners are very small. So there has to be a focus on creating synergies at the regional level to make the region also more attractive from the point of view of the investments. But then also, there is no point in focusing on access to the EU single market if we haven't created this stronger economic potential of the region. And therefore, the idea with the access to the EU single market is to start from those areas that build on the common regional market. So let's first work at the regional level and let's give access to these same areas into the EU single market. And of course, the preparation for accessing the EU single market requires a lot of work from the region. Accessing the EU single market, it will not create an advantage unless the countries are ready to sustain the pressure that comes, of course, from the EU single market. So great potential, but there is need to be ready for it. So that's why all these 4 dimensions need to really be put forward and pursued together, because the 4 together would really give a great, let's say, a new set of opportunities to unlock the economic potential of the region.
Thank you, Michela. I think we will talk again about this, and this is exactly the point that the Western Balkan countries are making. Can they have this democratic transformation without enough financial help to do that? And I'm taking advantage of having Milka from Montenegro and Donika later from Pristina. Should the Western Balkan countries debate this link between economic prosperity and democratic transformation, Milka, given the debate that is around this topic?
Much to having me here. It's my great pleasure to be with all of you and to discuss this important matter. I think we all should think when, after so many years of the process, region is now. Unfortunately, we have deep problems, we have structural problems, we have problems with corruption and organized crime, we have a problem with rule of law. We have actually never ended this transition from autocracy to democracy, and this is the major problem of the region. And what should be actually the role of EU in this transition? That is for me the key issue. And what should be the role of us? I think for years EU invested many years in sometimes wrong figures who mislead the countries in the wrong direction. Not just EU, but the West, for example, supported Mr. Vučić for years. They supported as well other corrupted leaders in the region, for example, Mr. Đukanović. And we in Montenegro are now most advanced in this region, they said, but where Montenegro is right now? We are right now without government. We have long negotiations about the new government, and we do not know who will be actually in the government and how this government will be and what will be the main goals of this government. We have no functional parliament as well. We have just new MPs in the seats, but we do not have a president, and we do not know when we will have. And what that means that we cannot get a new laws. We are completely stuck. We have no head of the Supreme Court. The former head of the Supreme Court is charged for the links with the mafia and with the drug clans. How we are going to deal with many other problems if we do not have all these institutions we have? So I think what we really need from the EU is a strong presence on the ground. We need experts from EU to be on the ground. Sometimes I think that we cannot by ourselves implement all what we need, we really need strong presence of the EU. And I believe that EU should actually invest in the experts to help us to start with the real progress and the implementation of these reforms.
Thank you, Milka. Donika, from your point of view about this debate of the financial help on the economic reforms and the democratization reforms of the Western Balkans, where do you stand in this debate?
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me, because my internet connection is as unstable as the Balkans is right now, unfortunately. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily link, I mean, financial incentives are, yes, important for democratic transformation of the region. This is something that we can all agree on, but it's not that simple. I mean, first of all, it's like whether there is a will for enlargement on the EU side and the will from the Western Balkans to actually implement the reforms that are needed for the EU integration. I mean, we all agree that there is no enlargement impetus as the one we have seen in 2003 in Thessaloniki. There is not an expansionist like enlargement in forms of waves anymore. There is subject to contingency, and this is obviously very much impacted by external factors. There is not much of a guidance from the EU, obviously. I mean, we pretend that there is this methodology, there is this toolbox, but honestly, this toolbox is from 2003, which now is being sharpened. There is this new methodology, there is this proposal for staged accession. It looks like, you know, we are basically building the plane while we are flying. Meaning that we are in the process of, you know, figuring out the process while we are still in the middle of it. Financial incentives are important, but in the case of the Western Balkans, since 2003, the enlargement toolbox wasn't sharpened enough to fit the reality on the ground, meaning that, you know, basically we dealt with a region that was having problems with weak institutions, lack of democratic culture, weak systems, which weren't able to actually deliver what the EU was asking for. And in addition to that, what we deal with today as well is that in previous enlargements, we had systems that actually wanted to join the EU. So it was just a matter of technicalities and guidance. In the case of the Western Balkans, unfortunately, we are dealing with systems that are not really willing to. And, you know, there is the elephant in the room, obviously Serbia, but there are also other countries which basically on paper show to some extent this will for enlargement, but they are not really showing the political will to actually do the reforms. And that's why we are now dealing with an enlargement process, which is basically unpredictable, subject to contingencies. And it feels like this impetus that we are looking for now, it is ad hoc, which is driven by security challenges, mainly of what is happening in Ukraine. And now there is this Israel-Palestine war, which totally will securitize everything. And there is this fear, not only for the security aspects, but also the potential refugee crisis, which we had in the past. So if you look at how the future is going to look like, unfortunately, I don't think that necessarily this financial incentives, you know, would solve the issue, but rather a multi-vector process, which, you know, requires the EU to really be genuinely committed to it. The Western Balkans really show this political will, which we haven't seen in the past decade, at least. And then obviously this political commitment. Ilva, when we are talking today about this, you know, financial incentives and the issue and then the reality on the ground, I mean, in the Balkans, at least in the past year, no one has talked about reforms. Everybody is talking about, you know, how do we prevent conflicts? I mean, there is this Kosovo-Serbia issue. There is this, what is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And there are people from Montenegro, which, you know, basically can also show the internal, you know, security issues and instability. So we are not talking about a region that now is talking about reforms. We are talking about a region that is trying to prevent going back to the narratives of the 90s. And this is a mistake that the EU has made by being happy remain as we are, but that every time something happens, there is going to be regress and the situation is going to worsen. And this is what we're dealing with today. Today, I'm happy you're all convening in Tirana because Albania is probably one of the countries in the Western Balkans that does not have bilateral issues. It's in the process of, paving the way for accession negotiations. I think it can be one of the cases in which we show how commitment, without bilateral issues can lead to potential reforms and EU integration.
Thank you, Donika, for your sober remarks. And I know I'm trying to be less Albanian today in this panel and more American, my new adopted country, and quoting Lincoln saying that I choose to be an optimist because I don't have any other way how to be anything else. So let's try to be a little bit more optimistic. And since we have our title of this forum is Unlocking the Progress and the European Future for the Western Balkans. How, Mihail, how will we make the Western Balkans more European? Waiting for the democratization reforms to happen first, knowing that democracy is a work in progress, as we know very well, even from some members of the European Union? Or will we help them inject economic, financial instruments to work together at the same time? What's your take on that?
Many thanks. I'm really grateful to Donika, but also Milka, because you mentioned, I think that we have more dimensions than only the financial support from the European Union for the... I guess I should shave my beard, then it might be easier. So I'm really grateful that also the focus was directed that it is not only an issue of financial support by the European Union. So let me first make clear, also from the German government, we really fully share the sentence that was said, without the Western Balkan 6, the European integration is not complete. Yes, so we are fully convinced the Western Balkan 6, they should be part of the European Union, and we want to have them in. So if we are speaking about the element of a time frame, maybe I'm sometimes, or we Germans, we are sometimes a spoiler. So we are fully for acceleration of the process, and there we are fully in line also with our colleagues of the European Union. But you also know, from our point of view, we have to do two things. First of all is in EU internally, we have to do our homework. This is also with regard to questions like qualified majority voting, etc., so that the European Union extended really also is functioning. And secondly, Germany is famous. We are always speaking from the merit-based approach. So we think it is in the interest of the countries, but also in the interest of the European Union, that also the countries are doing their homework. And this is something that has to be done. And so I'm grateful that it was mentioned. We do have at the moment in the region, it was mentioned Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. We have instability. I think also there's not sufficient talk really on the reform agenda. We are seeing a European dimension with the Russian war in the Ukraine, where we clearly see that we have a need of accelerated integration of the Western Balkans, also in the European Union. But what I would like to stress from the German side, the countries, the leaders, the business community, but also the civil society, that they have to contribute their part. I can't speak about EU finances and what the European Union is contributing, but if I look from the German side, I mean, if it comes to legal experts, if it comes to expertise in the economic field, if it comes to parliamentary expertise, we are really doing a lot in the Western Balkan countries, by our political foundations, by others. But to a certain degree, sorry for being a spoiler, it's also up to the leaders of the region, to the people who vote them, and also to contribute their part. But making clear from our point of view, we want to have the Western Balkan countries in the European Union as speedily as possible. It's in our interest.
Michela, I want to continue where we kind of left our conversation. Yes, the EU is committed to help the region, but on the other hand, the Western Balkans elites and political leadership should do their homeworks and they have to commit to the reforms. What would the EU expect the Western Balkans leadership at this moment? What would you want them to do? And you mentioned the Western Balkans 6, Mihail. I'm afraid that train has left now. It's going to be Western Balkans, every country on a separate way. As Milka mentioned, Montenegro was a front runner. Now it's far from that, and we have other countries that are being stuck. Donika mentioned security dimensions in Kosovo and Serbia relations.
Not jointly, but we want to have in the end all 6
Yes,
Western
absolutely,
Balkan countries in the European Union.
Thank you. Well, yeah, Michela?
Well, I think it's very clear that we have a new momentum. And whether this has been generated by a geopolitical consideration, I think that the bottom line here is that there is an opportunity that needs to be seized. I think it's really for, you know, what Minister Hassani said at the beginning, that the process has to be credible on both sides. I would like to reinforce that message. I think we have a real opportunity here. I think that on the EU side, we are definitely ready, as Mika just said, we are very ready for accelerating the process. We want the accession of the Western Balkans, but we cannot do it without having the countries to deliver on what are the requirements. So now your question is, what do we want from the countries? I think that there are, if you want, 2 different levels of response that is necessary. One is that if the countries are serious about acceding, there has to be clearly a political choice to be made. There are different, let's say, challenges in the different countries. I will not go into the specifics, but if it is a clear political choice, the political leadership has to give the clear orientation. Then there is all the technical work that needs to be done. And on that, frankly, the toolbox is not the one of 2003. The toolbox has developed gigantically. I have been around, let's say, the enlargement process, in fact, since 2003. The evolution is, I can absolutely testimony that has evolved drastically, building on the lessons learned and adjusted to the specific requirements also of the Western Balkans to be able to align to the different requirements of the Copenhagen criteria, the political criteria, the economic criteria, the key. And the way we are accompanying this process is much more, if you want, thorough, much more, goes much deeper than what was done at the time, in recognition of the fact that also the needs are different. And it's basically the involvement of the Commission service, the involvement of the technical support that we provide through experts from member states, from different type of technical support, in addition to the financial instruments. Because the financial instrument, I think we all said it, is important, but it is not the only instrument. It can be an important element of leverage, but there is much more, of course, that needs to be put in place to get to the result. Now, in terms of the requirements, I think there is a very strong focus on the fundamentals. And let me be absolutely clear here. Fundamentals does not mean only rule of law, anti-corruption, fundamental rights. It means also having identified this element of the economic criteria, and there is an obvious interconnection between rule of law, anti-corruption, and economic development, but the economic criteria have been put back into the sort of core of the fundamentals. But all the aspects of the fundamentals also, you know, going into public procurement, into basically a proper functioning of the public services also that have to be at the service of the citizen. And here I would like also to conclude, reinforce the point that Michela just made, the role of civil society. And this is not paying lip service to it. The civil society play a fundamental role, both in terms of following and influencing and pushing the authorities on the expectations of the citizens in terms of the leadership to deliver, because the accession process is a whole country process. It involves everybody, and it has a gigantic impact on citizens, because the transformation of the country means that there will be important reforms and sometimes also painful reforms that are necessary to become a performing member state. And this has to be explained to people, but also people can contribute to make them more relevant, more fit for purpose for the needs of the citizen. And this dialogue is something that, of course, we can support, but of course, it's for you to push as well.
Michela, thank you very much. We hear you clearly. I want now to ask Odeta, actually. When I asked the question, yes, the political dimension, but also the elites, including the civil society, are they sending the right messages that the Western Balkans is committed and will perform on the reforms that the European Union requires from the region? And you can talk more on Albania case. Is it sending the right messages on this regard?
Okay, I'll start by stating the obvious. I think that this is a process which involves both sides, the EU and the Western Balkans. Because what I hear in platforms like this is often like what the Western Balkans should do, what the EU should do, and this is a joint effort. And I think that's very important to emphasize. And yes, it's very important to emphasize that it is a matter of political will on both sides and political vision. And for that reason, I reiterated that when we look at the announced growth plan, we actually, like Michela was also presenting, outlining the 4 pillars of this plan. For us, it's important that all 4 elements are taken as jointly, including the reforms, including the need, of course, to comply with the EU legislation, with the acquis, particularly in those areas which are identified as sort of having the more ripple effect or transformative effect for the region, and are to a large extent included in the common regional market. So in that regard, yes, we need political will from both sides. And the criticism from this side of Europe comes that we haven't seen that much of political will in the past, I would say, decade from the EU, but now we see a shift, we see a positive discussion, we see what we can say positive development that was demonstrated with this announcement, with these new elements I mentioned, and Michela went into more depth with. Now, the messages we are sending as a region, I think it's important what also Donika said with regard to the security component. We are, in the past few years, we have been trying to mitigate effects of course, of an unfinished process of normalization between Serbia and Kosovo, of trying to prevent any scenario of worsening situation. And also we have seen in the context, in a sort of more micro context of regional cooperation in our joint efforts with the Commission, with RCC and all other actors, including Germany and member states, that at times regional cooperation is indeed, or most often is blocked because of unresolved issues between countries or governance issues in the countries. So I think, yes, and I'll say this with, of course, from a national but also regional perspective, we also need to show credibility.
The door, so you can continue.
We need to show credibility when it comes to regional commitments. So here the agreements on mobility were mentioned, the ones that were signed last year at the Berlin summit. It's very important that all 6 ratify these agreements, so the citizens can really have the benefits of these agreements. And I would go on and on endlessly for the other regional commitments we have taken. So that's very important. And from the Albanian perspective, that's a message we are also conveying at the leaders' summit on Monday, that we need to take these commitments seriously, and we need to also work jointly, not only in implementation, but also devising these new areas and instruments which, we are calling on the EU to integrate us more into. The other message, I think, which is very important, is that we also need to work very closely with the EU member states in the framework of Berlin process, of course, but also in this, on our EU path. When it comes to a number of commitments, of regional commitments, like here, Mylinda mentioned green lanes or blue lanes, these are initiatives which link us to the EU member states. And there is an economic and political dimension of these initiatives. And we call upon EU member states to work closely with us and to continue play that role of supporters in our EU reform agenda with regard, let's say, to the judiciary, with regard to rule of law, and so on. These countries, and we also overlap with the participants of Berlin process, all the countries that are the ones most invested in the transformation of this region. The other, I think, message which is very important, and we are conveying, is that yes, we'll carry on with the reforms, we'll carry on with our homework. We got the screening reports for the first cluster, we are working towards the screening of the other clusters. But what we also need to see is that A, we are more supported with, here it was mentioned, expertise, human capital, instruments, and we need to see a positive approach on the other side, on the side of the EU. A last one is security. Of course, when it comes to the Western Balkans, this is an area which we have, in fact, underlined this time and again. The EU cannot regard it as a sort of an afterthought, as a region which is in the periphery. It really needs to work with the region, as we have worked and as we have shown willingness to work with the EU in facing common or joint security challenges. So these are some of the main sort of strategic messages we are sending. Yeah. If I may just add 2 seconds, at the technical level, or more, let's say, tactical level, when we discuss about different instruments, mechanism we can join and so on, I think this is also an important policy discussion that we have started in the region. And by having this discussion at the Leaders' Summit on Monday, we can also show that we are willing to take more ownership on what is happening in the region and to have more proactive role, not just waiting from the EU of how they are going to step in and help us.
Thank you, Odeta. Donika, what's your take, what's your perspective on the Western Balkans leadership preparing their societies and their countries for the deep and painful reforms they should implement?
With calling it painful reforms because they are aiming to bring something good. So, I mean, we shouldn't even portray them as painful. Painful for whom? Like for corrupt leaders? Well, I mean, we shouldn't care about their pain in the process. Painful in terms of effort in actually making it happen, yes, but this is, this is something else. This is more, effort, struggle, dedication to growing up while trying to become the best of ourselves. The problem that I have with governments in the region is that they are preparing their societies for something completely different. They are not even, preparing, working to prepare and create this narrative that is pro-EU. And this is something that civil society has been doing for so long, but being in a process that it hasn't delivered in a while, it is very difficult to actually now be the advocate of a process which we at this point can't even understand. So the other problem that I have with the EU is that they pretend that they know what they want from us, which, yes, on paper, yes, there is a framework, a process, a ticking box technicality, but in reality, how is it possible to actually implement all that while supporting autocratic leaders on the ground? So it feels like the EU sort of acts like a bipolar, kind of person who preaches something else, but completely acts differently. I mean, yes, there is a problem from the Balkan countries, and I'm really happy that now we have Ukraine and Moldova joining on board, because they seem to be much more, fresh and dedicated, and really trying to show that they have this will to deliver on reforms amid crisis, war, and everything that they are facing on the ground. But, I think that we should go back to what the EU wants, with how the EU sees enlargement, what is going on with enlargement process internally, because, obviously we hear this deepening, widening debates, and on the other hand, the periphery and the core. Now there is, kind of this, French idea. So whether we will remain like forever in this core of the EU, but periphery and not the core. And, this is something that we need to answer from the EU. And then, this political will from the EU to actually enlarge towards the region. And of course, simultaneously really request the same things from the political elites in the Balkans. It works only if it's done at the same time, and Odeta is right. So we really have to work together and figure out the process. Otherwise, it's not gonna function. Going back to security, we always praise how this, Western Balkans EU security cooperation is good, but that's, just because the EU is effective only in cases when they really need Western Balkan on board. You name Frontex, there are, bilateral agreements on many, security challenges, that when the EU actually needs our contribution, but it should work on every other level. Otherwise, it's not gonna be effective.
Donika, I want your perspective. The messages sent from the region.
Opinion, the main problem of the region actually is the political elite. I don't think that we have a political elite with a strong will to really implement the reforms and change the society. When we are talking about progress, we should maybe ask us, where have we been 10 years ago and where we are now, what we achieved. When we are talking about the enlargement process in the Balkans, what is actually the key issue here? Are we going to be a part of EU, or we are going back to the 90s, as a colleague from Pristina said? So we have so many unsolved issues in this region. For example, what will be with Bosnia and Herzegovina? Nobody knows what will be with it. This is definitely not a functional country, and what we did in these 30 years since Dayton to make this country functional. For Europe, it is not just the issue how to support, but who you are supporting. What kind of, what political elite you are supporting. What political leaders you are supporting.
Challenge you there?
Yes.
From the Brussels perspective, the EU, we're supporting the leaders that the countries vote.
Sorry?
They would say, Mihail is nodding while I say this, that they would say that we're supporting the countries that, the leaders that their respective countries are voting.
That's true, and I mean, it is the fact, but I think that Europe should think not just about the carrots, but about the sticks as well. What will they do to Vučić after this event on the border with Kosovo? What kind of sanctions we will have, or are we going to have any sanctions? And I don't think that, I mean, compare us, these 6 Balkan countries, what they did in this process for more than, I don't know, almost 2 decades, and how quick was the first enlargement. So something is deeply wrong on the foundation, and not just in the region, but in the Brussels as well. So I think we all should really learn some lessons and really think how to continue with this process and how to prevent these countries to go back in the 90s. So for me, this is the key issue.
Sure. Thank you, Michael.
May I just come in at this sentence? I wouldn't say necessarily we support them, but I mean we have to work with them. So we have to work with the leaders that are elected. But if you speak about different countries and also how we position ourselves, I only can say, for example, after the terrible incident on the 24th of September in Banska, I mean, we have made very, very clear, for example, also to President Vučić, that we do expect clearly that they contribute to a full and clear investigation, that we really know what kind of people were involved, that they will be brought to justice. We are also trying, and that's also with the European Union level, if you look to the normalization dialogue and de-escalation dialogue, that the High Representative Borrell and the Special Envoy Lajčák is doing so. We are engaged. We have EULEX in Kosovo. So I think partly it's too easy if you look to Bosnia. I mean, we do have now from the international community for a long time the Office of the High Representative. So I think from the international community we are trying our best. But this alone, if we don't have the support from the local leaderships, and then it is simply a very, very difficult process.
Thank you, Michael. Mikela, we have the last 15 minutes of this panel that I want to ask you, if you had a wish list from this conference, the CSF conference, what would you expect the civil society to do, and what's their role, in your view, in advancing the European Western Balkans?
Thank you. Well, I would say different levels of engagement, in the sense that, first of all, let me also agree on the fact that, and also let me also be very specific, we do not support leaders, we support the countries, right? And let me also be very clear that, you know, our process is not a bureaucratic process. You know, it's not just a matter of having a list of requirements on paper. Is a matter of engaging also on reforms implementation. Let me just take one example of all. The big reform of the judiciary in Albania, and the role that we had in the vetting process as well, with a role that has been put in the constitution of the country. I mean, this is not a bureaucratic process. This means really working closely with the countries and all the institutions of the country to get the reforms done and to basically accelerate the preparation. So this is just a little comment and reaction to what I said before. Now, coming back to your question, different level, I would say, of engagement. When I look at the enlargement process and the accession process, one of the messages that we pass to both the authorities and civil society is that civil society plays an important role throughout the accession process. This means contributed into the formation of the positions, let's say, of the country into the negotiations, but it means also helping in explaining the reforms that are necessary. When I referred earlier to painful reforms, I was not referring certainly to the pain of reforming judiciary and rule of law and etc. What I was referring to is the transformation that is necessary to the socio-economic structures of the countries. And this means that, you know, very often when you look at the competition rules and, you know, these kind of issues, it means that, you know, the socio-economic structure needs to go through reforms. It means that, you know, the business sector reform means that for instance, the role of public enterprises has to be reviewed. And that means that this has, of course, implications and people will be affected, and there is need to adjust to that. That's what I had in mind. And civil society can play a role in that. And then the overall, let's say, if you want, internal dynamics in terms of what we had just discussed, civil society in an organized way that can also, you know, let's say, stimulate the important debates that are necessary with the political leadership of the country. So it's both, let's say, on the enlargement process and the requirements, but also to generate the internal discussion and internal pressure that is necessary for the leaders to do what you, as country citizens, want from your leaders. As Michael said, of course, we work with the leaders that are elected. But it's for the citizens of the country to choose the leaders that they want. And there, civil society obviously can play an important role.
Thank you, Michaela. Odeta, can I have your perspective on what can civil society do on a more creative and fresh approach towards pushing the EU to support the Western Balkans? What can they do? What would be your wish list?
Oh, this is the most difficult question of the three, in fact, because I think we were speaking, some of us, about previous lives. I also have a previous life, and I'm part of this community. I think they have been doing their job in a way in the past, since the beginning of the Berlin process. I think they have been quite active with policy suggestions, with policy initiatives. In fact, I would say very objectively that in some of the policy area or initiatives we are discussing and will be discussing on Monday among leaders, we are also building on some of the ideas of the civil society, and I think that is a very big contribution. I think the second contribution, and I can see this demonstrated physically in this room, is to forge relations between all 6 countries, to create what I referred previously as a public sphere, with all the sort of idealistic sort of ringtones of the term in Habermasian terms, but that sort of public sphere, which in fact where debate is unhindered and not influenced as much as it can be by other actors. The third, I think, is to extend this public sphere to European public sphere. In that connection, I would say we are very happy that we'll have the inauguration of College of Europe, the branch of College of Europe in Tirana on Monday, because in fact that is an instrument and a forum of public sphere in itself. Universities are, in this region, they are a fora, and everywhere they are a fora of public sphere. And I think forging these linkages between what civil society is doing, from those more on the activist sort of side of the spectrum to the most experts side of the spectrum, and what the university is doing is very important. And we need to create a pan-European public sphere in that sense. So I think it's very important that we have College of Europe here. It's very important that we'll have students from the entire region, we'll have researchers and professors from the entire region. And that is indeed a contribution and a step towards creating the next Western Balkans cadre of EU experts and EU bureaucrats. But I think it's as important to have as many European researchers, professors, and students from Europe in this part of Europe, in Tirana.
Donika, I want to ask you about the role, the contribution that the civil society can give to inspire the societies in the Western Balkans. What can they do? Do we have Donika? If not, we can continue with Milka.
Before I answer to that question, I need something to say. A friend of mine who is very much in this energy sector told me that I must send one message that really region need access to the carbon loans. It's very, very important, especially with this energy situation now. But now back to the civil society. The most important for us, I think, is to strengthen the civil society and to strengthen our pressure to the decision makers. This is crucial, I think, especially in some fields, especially in the field of rule of law, combating corruption and organized crime, and in all other reforms which are crucial for the region. That's why I think this kind of cooperation and the regional cooperation among the civil society is really crucial for us.
Your final thoughts on the civil society role, what would you expect them to do from the Western Balkans?
Well, we expect you to challenge your own leaders. We expect that you challenge us Yeah, and we also expect that you give your input, your creativity, your ideas, what we can do. We simply need your input. This is something what is really very important, and you can give impetus to processes that normally, if I may use this word, from bureaucrats or civil servants will not necessarily come. So that's why we do have this kind of civil society forum now for 8 years, because we really want to have this interaction with you. We also want to be challenged. Yeah, this is something what we really welcome. Let me just make one last remark, because you mentioned energy. I personally think this is one of the really serious challenges for the whole of the Western Balkan countries, especially now where you face challenges with regard to decarbonization, climate change, etc. I mean, we will start also with this year a regional climate partnership with 1.5 billion on loans, because we really think this is one of the areas that will be also for the future of the Western Balkans really decisive.
Thank you very much, all the participants in this panel. We're towards the end now. I have only one question that I really don't know who to ask about it. Who's going to unlock progress? EU or Western Balkans, or both, or joint? Let's think more about this on the other panels. But I believe this is time to start running now. And to do that, you need both dieting and be in shape. So from what I got from this conversation is that we have to continue push each other. EU push the Western Balkans, and the Western Balkans should push themselves to get ready with their reforms that are needed in order to join the values of the European Union. Thank you very much for your participation, and I want to invite you to follow all the other panels that are as interesting as this one. Thank you.